right, so as usual, I'm going to pause after our prayer. We'll say our prayer first, and then you can formulate and ask your questions. Of course, if there are no questions, there are no answers. So let us start with our prayer for teacher and student. By now you know it all, so you can repeat it with me. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Punuktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study yield illumination. May we not unnecessarily argue with each other, but peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good. So I welcome questions.
Swamiji, one question, if I may ask. So you often repeat the story of Jesus where he wakes up a person who is dead and he just says, "He but sleepeth." Right? So I was wondering, what is it that makes his word comes true? Is it because of his dedication to truth, or is it because of the purity of his heart, or is it because he has firm faith and no doubt? Or what was it exactly that made it come true, that made the dead person come alive?
Okay, that's a good question. And there's a similar question that has come from here. And I'll ask the questioner here to repeat the question and tie these two together. So come and ask your question. Yeah, you can just, yeah.
Namaste, Swamiji. So my question is that, does evil exist in this world? And if evil exists in this world, is it a part of Advaita? Thank you.
Okay. So of course, the simple answer to the last question will be, no, it cannot be part of Advaita, since if you have evil, there must also be good. They're two sides of the same coin. These are two shades of something. If you have the day, you have to have the night. If you have a plus, you have a minus. These are pairs of opposites. So we have to explain what is non-dualism now. Was Jesus a non-dualist? Is a good question associated with the first question. And then what is non-dualism and how does it apply to a situation where so-called healing has to take place? And what was the formula that Jesus used? So was it faith, or was it something else? Was it a different way of thinking? What was behind Jesus' healing or raising Lazarus from the dead? Assuming that is accurate record of events. And then, of course, part of Christian theology will be that Jesus himself raised himself from the dead. And the telling part in the episode is that Jesus is saying, "He but sleepeth," so it's a different approach. What is non-dualism? Advaita, very often misunderstood as Vedanta. But of course, Vedanta, within the umbrella of Vedanta, we have a dualistic system as well as a qualified dualistic system and a non-dualistic system. And if you study Jesus, if he is what he says he is and speaking truth, and if he's dedicated to truth, and that may be one reason or suggested reason why, being dedicated to truth, Lazarus awakes from the dead. But if we understand and investigate what is the fundamental truth behind everything, we come to a position, a transcendent position called non-dualism. Non-dualism, why not monism? Monism only means there's one thing, but the unconscious suggestion is if you have one, you have two, you have three, you have four. And so the preferred term philosophically will be non-dualism, Advaita. Now, in all of these philosophical things, we have to be practical. So we have to take this theory and see, is there some practical application for us? Because if somebody says, I'm a non-dualist, and he really believes it, then all the pain in the world has vanished, all the evil in the world has vanished, all the good also in the world has vanished. In fact, anything that is other than one has vanished. And when I knock my head on the wall and receive a bump, then the non-dualist may say, you see, don't worry about it, it's not there, it's all an illusion, it's only one thing. But his answer is also from a dualistic position, because he's assuming there's a head separate to a wall and a bump. Three things are there, and a statement, a pronouncement made about it. So he's also living in a dualistic or multiple world. So we have to be careful that we understand the theoretical thing, and in understanding it, the understanding will lead us to a real experiential understanding. There's a story about a man who was in a hot air balloon, and he lost his way, and the wind carried him, and he didn't know where he was at all. Anyway, he saw a man in a field, and he said, "Where am I?" And the man in the field said, "You're in a hot air balloon." And the man in the hot air balloon said, yes, I know that, but exactly, in relation to the ground, where am I? And the man in the field said, "You're 100 meters above the earth." He says, yes, that much I can estimate also, but exactly where is my location? Geographically, I'm lost. And the man in the field says, "You're 38 degrees latitude and 28 degrees longitude." None of these answers are helpful. And then the man in the balloon said, "Are you a philosopher?" And the man in the field says, "Yes, I happen to be a philosopher." Because you see, none of the answers were very meaningful, were very practical. So we have to bring this within a range of practicality. And there's a distance between principle and practice. First, we have to understand what is the principle, and then how do the practice catch up with it. So let's discuss the principle of non-dualism and see, is there an application from a non-dualistic point of view to Jesus's dualistic healing? Is there some connection with it? Now, logically, if you want to find the foundation of something, then you have to go to one thing, the highest, most generalized position possible. Whether this is true in science or not, of course, it's true in all investigations. For example, can you make any distinction between water in a lake before the Niagara Falls, and then is there a distinction between the water after the Niagara Falls onwards? So the water in Lake Erie that flows over an edge of the Niagara Falls and flows on from there. We could easily maybe say there are three different waters. We call one Lake Erie. We call one Niagara Falls. We call one the river thereafter. But is it true? Well, yes, for our convenience sake, for geographic understanding, for positions, finding out what is relevant to what, we can say there are three positions. The water is called Lake Erie. When it's in a lake, it's called Niagara Falls when it falls over at great speed, velocity, and creates a mist. And it's also called another thing when it flows on. But is that the same water that comes from your tap? Well, water must be water, regardless of whether it's in your tap, regardless of whether it's in Lake Erie or over the Niagara Falls, or whether it's going on from there. Water is the substance. Now we can divide the whole of existence into name, form, we can say function also, and substance. And when we discuss name and form, several components are required. Because a thing, every form has a capacity to change, time must be involved. And because form is an object within certain confines and can be measured, it occupies a certain space. Time and space, therefore, are involved. And then different things will look different because they have different functional roles to play. So I play the role currently of the Swami, and somebody else plays the role of an accountant, and somebody else plays the role of a shopkeeper. One person plays the role of a military person. But from another point of view, we are all humanity. When we forget the generalized principle, we have a fighting attitude that creates violence and difficulties. And so our sense of individuality is called dualism because there are two things, myself on the one side and the world on the other. The world has a multiple aspect, and myself has a single aspect, until I find out what is this sense of self, what does it represent? And then when I count up how many cells are there in the body, I find something like 3 trillion or 3 trillion cells, or 30 trillion cells maybe. Trillions of cells are there, each one individual. And from the cellular point of view, the cell is living in a vast universe of other cells. And from an atomic point of view, the electron is living in a vast, obscure area, distant, and vast distant equivalent to our version of 4 kilometers away from the proton. If you go out in space to look at the vastness there, it is only the Hubble telescope recently, and now there's a new telescope which has gone up, and we're peering into the vastness of space to find out what is the most distant object we can find. Going back even 13 billion years, we can look. But what we're looking at, probably it doesn't exist anymore, because everything we see is in the past. We're looking backwards in terms of time. That means, therefore, that what we are seeing is not 100% reliable. And even when I look at somebody, it's all in the past, because light takes some time to reach the eyeball. It may be something like a flash. It takes 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes for the light from the sun to reach the eyeball. So everything I'm looking at is 8.5 minutes ago from that point of view. I'm always looking at something in the past. So I have to revalue my understanding of what is reality. I've divided reality into 2 sections. There is the relative reality that has this component of change, impermanence. And I have to look on the other side and see, is there something substantial that doesn't change? And when I look at it, do I see a totality? And when I see a totality, does this understanding of non-dualism occur? So it must be like that. And how to convey these ideas, we have to get away from the intellectual grasping of such a thing, understand the principle in an abstract way, and normally by using a number of different examples. Communication is a very tricky affair, particularly when we don't have appropriate language to describe things. So there's a very old Jewish story. It tells of the Pope hundreds of years ago, not thousands, hundreds of years ago. And the Pope decided all the Jews must be expelled from Italy. And the Jews protested. And so the Pope said, look, I'll try and be reasonable, because I'm stating these things on differences of religion. But if we can have a debate on whose religion is true, and if we win, if the Pope wins, well then of course the Jews will agree to go. But if the Jews win, then we can allow them to stay. They're obviously intellectually astute enough to win an argument. And we're trying to find out what is the truth of something. You see, when the truth becomes a fragmented thing, it just only falls into the relative section, not the ultimate absolute section. Now the problem is the Jews selected an intellectual man, a great philosopher, great theologian, wise man, an elderly rabbi, to engage in a debate. So they set up a debate, and the Pope couldn't speak Yiddish, and the rabbi could not speak Latin, so they agreed to have a silent debate. That is, to communicate by virtue of sign language. So they sat in a forum, everybody was waiting in anticipation, and the Pope begins the debate by holding up 3 fingers. And the rabbi holds up 1 finger like this. The next thing is the Pope circulates his finger like this, and the rabbi points his finger down here. And the next thing is the Pope brings out the wafer of the Catholic Church and a cup of wine, and the rabbi brings out an apple. And the Pope stands up and says, "I'm defeated." The rabbi has won all the arguments. The Jews can stay. And then, as they had a review of what went on, all the cardinals assembled around the Pope and said, "How is it that you were defeated in this debate?" And the Pope said he answered every question. With great wisdom, he answered. I pointed out the Trinity. And he reminded me, yes, but we all believe in one God, by pointing the finger down. By pointing the finger like this, one. I pointed 3, he pointed 1. And then I pointed out that, you see, God is actually around us. And he pointed out, no, yes, but he's also here, he reminded me, on this earth. And then I brought out the wafer and the wine and said, you see, but this is the way to absolve you of your sins. And the rabbi brings out an apple. He says, yes, but the original sin is there with Adam and Eve, who took the apple. Can't defeat any arguments like that. Then the Jewish people gathered around the rabbi and said, how did the debate go? We was very surprised. How did you manage to win the debate? He said, he shrugged his shoulders. So he said, you see, the Pope brought up 3 fingers and said, you see, you have 3 days to get out. And I pointed my finger and said, up yours. I won't. Objected. And then the Pope, he moved his hand around here. He said, all you Jews must gather up and get out. And I said, no, we're going to stay here. And then he brought his lunch out and I brought mine out. I don't know how else it worked. So you see, there's a great misunderstanding when we look at this world and operate it in a dualistic fashion. However, it is functional. The only area of dysfunction is when we take this world as permanent. When we take this world as one thing, knowing and realizing that there's actually many things. We take this world to be permanent, it's not, it's impermanent. We take time and space to be the real framework in which we can only operate. And there's something beyond it. We take, in the example I gave, Lake Erie, Niagara Falls, and beyond it to be different things. And the water in the tap is something completely separate. And it's all one thing. That is, it is all substance. Name, form, and substance. These are the 3 things. And the examples given in the non-dualistic principles will be to see the subtlety of the argument, will be to point out material substance and forms. Supposing you have clay and you make a dozen different objects of clay. One is an elephant, one is this, one is that. Then is it separate or is it one thing, clay, but names and forms are different? But if you ask the elephant, if you were conscious, please tell me, what are you? If he was saying something truthfully from a substantial point of view, you'd say, I'm clay. You can't have gold and a ring, or gold and a bracelet separately. Whatever is a bracelet, a ring, whatever object you make, is only gold. Gold is a substance. Non-dualism, therefore, is understanding what is the substance and not making the error, all the names and forms are different and separate from it. Yet both are true. We can look at the name and form and say it has, and we can change our language, it has the form of something else, but the name is different. But the substance is the same thing, and the function also changes with name and form. I always give you the example of a steel sheet. Steel sheet, 20 meters long, let us say 5 meters wide. Its function sinks in water, about half an inch thick. Now, when you apply heat to it, bend it nicely, put it through a press, you curve the ends up, you join them, and you put a cabin there. It's still the same dimensions, but now the function has changed and the name has changed also. Instead of saying steel sheet, we say boat. Function, it floats in water. Same thing, by changing its shape, but changing its form and its name, its function also has changed. So this is the principle of it. Now let's look about the practice of it. What is the substance of what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we taste? We have to stand in a separate, different area. We have to stand away from the involvement and attachment of the name and the form and its relationships to multiplicity. Stand away from the principle of dualism. And then where we stand will be something not bound by time or space, something that has no mind, something that has no moving parts, something that has no change or evolution in time. It's inconceivable. We only have to use representative language for it. And that's necessary in a principle. What about the practice? We can practice to stand aloof from all these things in a poised area, as it were, poised position as the single seer, knower, thinker, witness in one that observes not only this state of name and form changing, but also the state of dream, which has the same characteristics, namely change, namely time and space, causation are all involved there. And during that experience, it is seen to be real and solid until it evaporates and we wake up. And from the waking point, we judge it was unreal. It was only a dream. But from the dream point of view, only the dream events are there. Who's noticing it? Some being that is not involved in the change, some being that has no coming or going, some being that is able to witness the comings and goings, and also some being that can not be a witness also, when all the objects vanish. Well, let us look now at the other aspect of it, of our experience. Another state of consciousness will be that there is absolutely no time, no space, no distinction. A sense of peace is there. So only that object of peace is there. We call this deep sleep. And every night, from a waking point of view, we go through this 4 or 5 times as a cycle at night. And when we wake up, again assuming this identity. But when you look at it objectively, this identity is only there for passport purposes. And the passport doesn't allow you or disallow you to go across the dream state. No visa is required. Simply, you glide across the border and occupy all the multiple scenes and personalities in a dream. And that glides across the border again. No need to make an application. If you dream I'm a king with a queen and a palace and live for 1,000 years, there's no point in making an application. Can I go to this blank? I call it blank of Ireland. This blank where nothing is there except objective peace, a sense of peace, registered after the fact. Some independent entity is looking at all of this as a witness, as an enjoyer of the scenes, separate from it. Now supposing all the scenes vanish completely, instead of having a waking experience or a dream or even a deep sleep. That entity stands there, no point in calling it the witness. There's nothing to witness. It is only that non-dual, that Advaita position, non-dualism. How do we get to that state? We get to that state by understanding that all of these other three states are all states of mind, states of consciousness. We have an example. We can look through a telescope at the multiple stars that are there. James Webb telescope is putting us back something like 13 billion years back in time. And according to an estimated count, 200 billion galaxies all around us, most of which we don't see. We only see a small portion of what is there. 200 billion galaxies we'd never suspect with the naked eye. We have to use an instrument to appreciate it. And then we have the capacity also to look at the telescope itself, in which case we don't see 200 billion stars or 200 billion galaxies with countless other stars within them. We're now seeing something different. We're seeing the mechanism through which we saw it. That telescope is equivalent to mind. We are looking through the mind at these objects, and the mind itself is making a fragmentation. But is it a real fragmentation or just a seeming fragmentation? If you look at it properly, it's a seeming fragmentation, because if it was actual, then we would always have to see it. But we can look at the telescope itself, we can look at the mind, we can analyze it, what states it in at any given time. It's an instrument, and therefore we can watch the mechanisms called psychology. Where we can look away from the telescope as well. We have the freedom to do that. Where you look away from the telescope, we're not looking at the stars or identifying them or the galaxies, nor are we looking at the mind, but indicating as a free area, as it were, in me, that has the freedom to look at the stars through the telescope, look at the telescope and away also. And that freedom, that area, so-called a freedom, see the awkwardness of the language, that itself is this non-dualistic position. In other words, nothing else is there. Now, when I go back and look at the relative position, does it mean that I can no longer, having realized this non-duality, I can no longer look at the telescope or through the telescope? No, I can do it. But now I have a new experiential understanding. I'm not that. I'm not the telescope. Nor am the objects that are seen through it. I am that incomprehensible, infinite, invisible that the Bhagavad Gita declares, water cannot wet me, fire cannot burn me, and so on. Wind cannot dry me, all of these things. So, with these things in mind, how does Jesus operate the system? He must look at all these different aspects. When he sees in front of him people suffering, what will he be seeing? He'll be seeing social conditions that moves his heart with compassion. Because all of these great souls will have a compassion. Does the compassion go away once I understand I and the Father are one? So he's postulating three positions. First position, he's saying, the Father in heaven. I'm praying to the Father in heaven. He who has seen the Son has seen the Father. Two positions, dualism. And in seeming contradiction, he says, I am the vine and you are the branches. I'm the spark of the divine. This is an intermediate position. A connection is there. Some connectivity is there. When I switch a light on, I understand there's a connection between the electric current, the switch itself, and then the effect in the light bulb through a filament. All three positions I can understand in a non-contradictory way, because when I look behind, I see only one thing: electrical current, electrical energy is there. And we can apply it in many different ways. So once I understand the substance, I've actually understood everything. Once I've understood gold, I know everything made from gold. Once I understand clay, I know every object made from clay. Once I understand the substance, the name and form I see as variations. And when name and form changes, function also changes. So, taking Jesus at his word, that there are these three positions, how will he look on the world? He'll shift his understanding, and his internal wiring will look different from the way you and I view the world. The way I view the world is, there's a world separate from me, and it requires correction and intervention. And if it's beyond my personal capabilities, then I pray, Lord, please intervene. And so much of prayer will be interventionist prayer, saying, please intervene in my life, please change things, please make something good or bad. Bad because if somebody insults us, we might make a prayer, please may this person wake up with horns on his head. See, may he have spots all over, may he get a skin disease, all of these kinds of things, these kind of curses can take place. In Africa, I've seen many, many examples of that. But what is it based on? Based on a movement of the mind that has to have its effect in this world. Every movement of the mind will not be separate from anything else. Now, Vivekananda describes this as prana. He goes one step further, he calls it psychic prana. Psychic prana, the most subtle form of energy that we can have is thought. Thought is very powerful. Thought is the most powerful and swiftest thing that you can experience. What is the science behind it? Every thought movement occurs in the generalized version of your mind called cosmic mind. The cosmic mind, from a religious point of view, would be a personal God. So when you make a prayer to a personal God, you really are tapping into a cosmic mind. And if you don't contradict your thought, if you don't go back on your word, then the cosmic mind, that is the creative cosmic mind, condenses, having arranged all the different components, making your crooked path straight, into the reality, the relative reality that comes as all these names and forms. Jesus understanding that, and understanding 3 states of consciousness, that every night we have a dress rehearsal for death. We go into that area of deep sleep, an anonymous area where our passport self is gone. Our creative self, where we make, through our imagination, all kinds of scenes, that also is gone. And the area of peace is also gone. Then I can stand there full and free in a state of perfection. Knowing that area of freedom, I can tap into it. I can access it. Knowing that it is that generalized substance in truth, with a penetrating vision, I can go there. So instead of saying, oh, lame man, you have come to me, what a pity, let me try and change something, Jesus' outlook will be different. And he, in his day, he only had the facilities in front of him, a donkey, sandals, and so on. We can do much more. We have jumbo jets and internet and what have you. Many more things we can do. But he was working with what he had, but his penetrating vision made a change. How can you be lame, O Lord of the universe, standing behind there, full and free and perfect? You're not lame, you're not defective, you are always full and free. You're not diseased, you're not handicapped in any way. So starting off from a position of compassion, and then saying, your faith has saved you. What does that mean? It means you came to me thinking absolutely surely that I will do something. From my point of view, it wasn't like that. From my point of view, I only saw that perfection, that Father in heaven standing there. Going through the various multiple layers, I saw that. And that perfection, that kingdom of heaven from within, shone through and made a transformation. Perfection will stand there only. The other things will have gone. Oh, Jesus, Lazarus is dead. If you had been here, he would have been alive. Jesus' point of view, every night we have a dress rehearsal called death. If you think that he's dead, you're mistaken. There's no such thing as death. Only temporary transformations here and there. The law of conservation is very clear. Sum total of energy and matter is the same. It cannot be created nor destroyed. One of the difficulties of the cosmological theory of the Big Bang, it seems to violate all the laws of physics, or at least that conservation law. How can you create something from nothing? You can't suddenly. Energy and matter cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. But the answer is, well, time and space itself was created at a single moment, in a singularity. That's their answer. You have to have that answer. Otherwise, you're violating a fundamental law of physics. So these laws which are there, that we normally operate, we're subject to gravitational influence. We're subject to limitation in walking, bodily movement, and so on. All these so-called limitations are only because we have a limited point of view, and we create a limited area around ourselves and operate within that context. Otherwise, if we broaden our vision, we can see something even more, something more subtle. And the more subtle we go in, the more truthful of a position we find. Until ultimately, there's only one there without a second, a non-dualistic position that reinterprets and rearranges our understanding. And that truth comes through. Now let's deal with the question. Was it faith? Was it truth? Or was it some kind of shifted understanding? All three were employed. Faith was employed, an utmost trust because the principles are clearly understood. And the credibility of Jesus clearly understood on the other side. The other man also has faith. Makes a kind of alliance in that way. Second thing is, Jesus was dedicated to truth. And anybody dedicated to truth, whatever comes out of his mouth will come true. But it wasn't a falsehood to say the Lord of the universe has no moving parts, or no change in time, and is already full and free and perfect, and not in any way defective. With that in mind, something comes through, we call it spiritual healing. Jesus declares he's just sleeping. Naturally, a sleeping man, you can wake up. So Lazarus wakes up. If he had said, yes, unfortunately he's dead, and so on and so forth, that would have been different. But that wasn't Jesus' point of view. That's a human point of view. That's our normal point of view, so-called normal point of view. But life expires, that's finished. Or a person is blind. Yes, nothing we can do about it. Send him to the optician. The optician says, or the optical specialist will say, no, unfortunately, he was blind from birth. That's a permanent defect. And although we can remove cataracts and all the rest of it, unfortunately, this genetic disease we can't cure. He has to live with this blindness. Certain vital components in the eye are missing. Really nothing we can do. Jesus doesn't dismiss it like that. Get up, take your bed up and walk, says to the lame man. Open your eyes, wash the clay away from your eyes in the river, you'll see. And the blind man sees, and the dead man wakes up. So it is with our own life. This is the practical application of non-dualism, which understands that even when I go back into the world of individual identities, the world of dream, and the calm, quiet, and blank so-called of dream and sleep, still I understand what is the truth. And the truth will set me free. So that is the position of Jesus. We have to cultivate that position ourselves. It starts off with a dualistic position because even though we may know this non-dualistic principle, practice takes some time to catch up. And if we understand that, the way in which we'll get to this non-dualistic position will be by taking the instrumentation of the mind and cleaning it nicely, removing its misleading, fragmenting aspect of it. And once we understand that it is the mind that produces waking, dream, and dream asleep, that it is an eternal self that witnesses it, And when we understand that beyond mere theory, beyond mere, okay, there's a principle, and start practicing this clarification, this process of purification of the mind, then it is like taking a mirror and cleaning off the dirt. You can't see things properly as long as the dirt is there. When you clean the dirt off, you can see the image quite clearly. We are all made in the image and likeness of that Supreme Being. How is it that we don't see it, don't notice it? How is it that we declare this world is bad? Only because we didn't sit where this non-dualistic entity sat, and where this entity entered into a creative role, sat on a golden throne, and made the world and saw that it was good. We see it as bad. But is it bad? So there are no bad people, is my oft-quoted statement. There are only bad behaviors. You change the behavior, and things get corrected. So we have to take these measures. These measures are called spiritual practice or yoga. And we have to combine all our efforts in such a way that we make use of the energy that we normally channel into our work. We have to use this energy that we normally disrupts us in our emotional states and channel it towards love. We have to take this energy that is telling us of a dualistic multiple world that seems to be one, just because it looks like a continuum in time and space, and sort it all out and understand the divine flow everywhere. And then we have to internally sit and access this in the silent room, if you like, or silent quarter of the mind, of the internal heart. Now, this is progressively called Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Dhyana Yoga meditation. And all these four have to be adopted. Of course, you can emphasize one approach more than the other, according to your personality. But all has to be covered, because they're all aspects of the mind. What we call the energy to do work is the application of a willing mind that is using energy to fulfill certain goals and purposes. And what we call, Bhakti Yoga is part of the mind, the emotional part of the mind that easily upsets our equilibrium very quickly, probably quicker than anything else. Somebody praises me, internally elated. Somebody curses me or blames me, and I get deflated like a balloon. Puff up, deflation. And people make this confusion, superimposing permanency on the impermanent. And then finally, in the depths of our soul, this intellect misunderstanding is there for all of us, part of the overall instrument of the mind. And then that final method which says, I can actually still these waves. And once I neutralize these waves through systematic effort, then I can see the reality of what is there. All of these are purification methods. Then I see the reality not only in myself, but I see it everywhere else. And when I see it everywhere else, what I see filters through. It pours through and arrives as a changed world with changed circumstances that some people say, oh, it's a miracle. You go to that person, he knows how to do miracles. No, he knows how to shift his mind and look at things from a new way, from a different way, and encourages us to do the same also. All right. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, Swamiji, thank you. I'm still trying to understand what is it. So when I look at somebody and at least I imagine the divine in that person, that doesn't have the same effect. So what was it in Jesus that made this happen?
No, you see, it will have the same effect because we're living in a world of imagination anyway. And when we use our creative imagination, see God with all his angels there behind the person, use that and get the corresponding feeling with it, the transformation has taken place because there's not much difference between imagination to the point of reality. So we have to use our imagination, but it has to be accompanied by a feeling, and that feeling has to come from the conviction of truth within us.
Okay. Thank you so much.
It requires practice, of course, to the extent that it becomes our immediate way of looking at things. Naturally, Jesus had that immediate way of looking at things. He didn't have to practice. Can I imagine it and so on? He saw it as a reality. We start off, though, by using our imagination. When we use our imagination, we evoke the same principle behind it. Absolutely. It has the same effect. How is it that Jesus, it can happen in an instant? Because automatically he sees this. For us, we have to rehearse it until it becomes, oh, that's our natural way of looking at it. So that wherever you look, wherever such a person looks, they only see this non-dual entity. They only see this one without a second. They only see this pure Brahman, this pure spirit. And there's no break in a spirit. If there's a break in a spirit, it's no longer spirit. Unless it's alcoholic spirit, of course. There's no break in spirit. There's a break in everything else. But spirit has no time or space. There are no fragments within it. When we see that some totality everywhere, automatically, then that comes through. The totality being evoked, totality comes through. Imagining it, yes, we do that. Until we understand that, you see, whatever we imagine is actually the thing in itself, ultimately. How can you imagine a mountain if there's not a mountain? See, some people say, you can imagine a unicorn. A unicorn doesn't exist, though. No, the component parts exist. You see a horn on a rhinoceros or something, you know what that looks like. And you've seen a horse, you know what that looks like. You've seen the color white and pink, you know what that looks like. When you combine all these things, it's called a unicorn. You can't imagine something you have never experienced. So we start off like that. And that representation of it is a symbol or representation of the thing in itself. The thing in itself comes through. That's why feeling is important. You can't just do it through abstract thinking. If you see God there, dressed up with all his angels and saints, in glorious, glorious light, embodiment of love, and it touches your heart and moves you, a vision of the Lord, then that's equivalent to seeing the thing in itself. And that's a useful tool we have to have. We have to have and mobilize that image making. Because what we're doing is, all our relative ignorance is because we are image making the wrong thing. We're creating images which don't correspond to the actual reality. Give some example of that. Yes. When we have some kind of fear about the unknown of the future, we are creating images which are not there yet. Naturally, they'll arrive. in our area of experience. And we look back in the past and we see doubtful areas of regret and so on and so forth. And that comes up and creates a similar situation for us. That's how we occupy our mind. Supposing we occupy our mind with pure spirit, pure divinity, the infinite invisible, nothing more, nothing less. And since it is infinite and since it is invisible, we have to employ the imagination that previously was giving us a problem. Now it's a revealing factor for us. Revising the mind in such a way that it becomes a revealing mind. So that's the spiritual practice and discipline we have to follow. It's accompanied by an element of faith. Lord, you are there. No doubt. Despite what I see, Lord, you are there. I learned it from principles. Without that presence there, the eyes don't move, the heart doesn't beat, all these things. So that's one thing. Then I have to understand, okay, can I feel your living presence coming through? Yes. Can I intensify that until only you stand there, Lord, dressed up in this way? Yes. That much alone will allow the spiritual healing to take place. The more we practice that, closer we are getting to the truth. But somebody who knows and declares, I and the Father are one, instantaneously, that person will be tuned into that straight away. Okay. So we have a few more minutes to go. Any further questions would be?
Can we say that we have free will in the middle of this process, or no? No, we don't.
Okay. So in this process, when we say we have free will, well, freedom and will are opposites. Because if you exercise will, you're exercising a movement within restrictions. As I may have said before, if you will to move the chair from A to B, pre-existing chair must be there, and some constraints must be there. So when we say we are free, it means we are free within a small scope. But we do have freedom of choice because the area of freedom is free. So we can exercise our judgment. And we have to. And this is called discernment. We have to all the time think what is useful, what is not, what is real, what is unreal. This technique of asserting a reality and at the same time understanding what is subject to change, what Buddhists call flux. So Eastern philosophy always has that clear understanding that what we call a reality is actually something like a floating thing, something like a changeable set of scenes and events, something like waves in an ocean that are continuously reconfiguring. But then we have to understand there's only one ocean below it. That area is an area of freedom. So we have free choice when presented with various options. And normally it's whether we exert our own will and direct something as we consciously wish, or on the other hand, whether we simply let it move by itself, not attend to it. Like waking up in the morning. You can put the alarm on in the morning and say, let me now relax because it's a Sunday. And then you may drift off and wake up at 10 o'clock or something. Because you didn't exercise a will that says, when the alarm goes off, I get up. So when we relax this exercise that inherently we have, sometimes it is called the wrong choice. Because there's nothing that happens which we didn't actually consciously choose. When we look back and see the chain of events, we see we chose a certain course of action. Supposing you say you committed a crime and you had no choice because economic conditions were so bad that I stole a loaf of bread. No matter how bad things are, no matter what you present as a set of circumstances, you yourself chose to do this, and the magistrate will judge you on based on that, on your choice, not on the circumstances around it. I don't like the term free will because it's inaccurate, but we certainly have free choice. We can certainly stand back in a poised area and evaluate things and exert our choice, exert our will, if you wish. In that sense, we have free will. In another sense, I cannot have something since I am freedom itself. The so-called area that I call freedom, that is me. I'm already free. I don't have to get freedom. What is the evidence of it? That I can exercise this freedom in various constrained areas. What should I choose to do? I should choose to a preferable path away from a pleasurable path. And in that preferable path requires discernment. And in that area of discernment, then I practice that and see that there is a reward. And then the trap is, will I do it because there is a reward, because of how I feel? Or will I try to access the truth about it? We all have a choice. Okay, John, your microphone is on.
In this case, we don't.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was on.
You're just hold on. Yeah.
In this case, we don't. So our life is. We don't have a destiny. We don't have something that is. So I cannot do anything because my destiny is this. So it's like I don't have this free of choice, because since I arrived to the world till my end, my destiny is already.
In that sense, yes, because you didn't choose to be born in a certain country. You didn't choose that you could come in, and despite the fact that you want to, you can't fly. You don't have the equipment to do it. So we have these constraints. Now, supposing in terms of a certain element of design, we are part and parcel of a great total expression that only works when things work in harmony. But how did you arrive at a physical body? How did you arrive at the position of a thinking human being? Was it that it was an uncontrolled destiny? In some sense, there was a freedom urging itself to unfold. Yes. In another sense, your own self-effort made it happen. So you arrived as a human being because of your own actions in the past. So there's a law of causality that comes in. Causality from your own effort, and causality as a natural order of things. The causality as a natural order of things we call destiny. The causality that is caused by you individually, that is called your own exercising of free will. Which is not really free as we think, because, and Ramakrishna gives us the example that I give many times, a cow that is tethered by a rope is able to roam the whole field. If we give it enough rope, it's able to roam the whole field and thinks it is free. But it is not. It's always tied to the pole. So from that point of view, we are not really free. From another point of view, when we get out, when we break that bond, and we do it in a determined way. So we decide, supposing you are tethered to a pole and you only realize it now. Another example I've seen is an elephant, you see. An elephant, they tie a chain and tie that to a tree, and then they undo that. The elephant cannot move. Psychologically, it thinks I'm still tethered to this tree, but it's not. So it's free potentially, it doesn't exercise its freedom. And so when we exercise so-called free will, in a way we're exercising the freedom aspect, but the willing aspect will be very limited. And that's all designed for us to completely understand and realize our own inherent freedom. We were free all along. It only looked as if we were bound and trapped. Now, the only difference is this, that from the Sankhya point of view, where we get all these ideas from, it tells us there are 3 ropes that bind us. These ropes are called ropes, gunas. Guna, rope, thing that keeps us tethered and bound. And by learning how to deal with these 3 ropes, we now can register our own inherent freedom because we're using these components. And when you use something independently, you are free. When you use the notes on a piano, it means I'm not the piano and I can use it as I want. But if I want to play this piano and have no skill in it or experience in it or practice in it, I'll be constrained by my own limitations of skill or lack of skill. Then through practice, I realize, oh, I don't know what I was worried about in the beginning. I can now choose to sit down on the piano or sit somewhere else. And when I sit at the piano, I can play all the notes. So true freedom really means I have the capacity to engage in the activity or not. I can engage in the world or not. I can look through the telescope at the stars. But if I think I am the telescope, that's all I will see. I have to realize, no, actually, I can actually look at the telescope. I'm not the telescope, and I can look away from it also. I'm not the only picture of the stars that I see, nor am I the telescope. Therefore, I can stand free. That is true freedom. It doesn't, then I will engage in the restrictive use, the instrumentality of something, and I can do it as I wish. Freely, I can do it. And the constraints then become useful. How else will I look at the stars except through a telescope? Well, I can move the telescope and still see the stars. I don't have to look through the telescope anymore. I'm a free area that can choose to look through something or as or away. And that is the process in spiritual life. When I see through or in something, I see God in something. That's how Jesus would have looked. I see God in that person. Then I see that grace flowing through, divine grace and presence flowing through. And then as, and then beyond. So if you look at the Bhagavad Gita and sum up all the divine laws, Krishna shifts his language and says, as. I come as this, as that. That's non-dualism. All right. So we've exceeded our time. Thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Bonne journée.
Merci.
Guru Mahagat.